when it comes to taking a look at the SEC, how do you gauge this conference? Because I know that there are a few season win totals that you have placed, and we'll dive into those in a minute, but I know that it's been Alabama, Georgia, and darn near anyone else. Do you see that really being the case once again this year with regards to the SEC title game, with regards to just the SEC as a whole, or might there be a surprise team or two?
I think there could be a surprise team if from the odd standpoint, but probably a rematch of last year. I love LSU at plus 450. I think Georgia's going to run through the East. And then when you talk about the LSU Tigers, Brian Kelly enters year 2. Year 1's always so tough on a coach, installing your new offense, installing your new defense, getting familiar with the personnel. So year 2, I think they're going to take a jump forward in the right direction. They also had a great offseason in the transfer portal. I thought they got a lot better on the offensive defensive line. So I love them at plus 450. I think they're actually a better roster than Alabama's roster right now. I know they got to play in Tuscaloosa, but I'm also, to reveal the hand here, I'm also, I love the over on their win totals as well. I think they'll beat Florida State in the opening game. Once again, they lost that game a year ago. That was Brian Kelly's first game in Baton Rouge, and now they got to go to Orlando, somewhat of a neutral site, to take on Florida State. And I think LSU's in a better spot. And I think they have one of the best quarterback rooms in America. So if Daniels ends up getting injured or something, Nussmeier is a stud at the backup spot. And then you look at the way the schedule aligns. How about the fact they don't have an away game in really like the month of November there? I guess they have the Alabama one, but look at the backside of that schedule. Only one away game out of 6 games there. I love them, and I think they're the best roster in the SEC West.
And I think they catch a few breaks with that schedule as well as Texas A&M. I just have not been bullish on them in recent years. Florida, I know that we were talking in hour number 1 with Mark Drumheller and Tom Casali of Action Network about that, and they're down on Florida. I'm down on Florida as well, so I do think that they catch a few breaks on that front. And you were talking about liking LSU with a 9.5 win total. There's another team in the SEC with a win total of 9.5 now. Very, very much shaded down to the under at right around minus 180, so you're going to have to pay for it, but that'd be Tennessee. How do you gauge this team? Because we saw Hendon Hooker and company really do a nice job. Once Hooker went down, that was a little bit brutal for the team, but we saw Tennessee take some nice strides forward. But I do think that what was revealed is that Tennessee, without Hooker in the fold, it was really a case in which the entire team went down with him, it felt.
Somewhat. I mean, Joe Milton's experience, he's going to be taking over the Michigan transfer. They also have a 5-star kid out of Long Beach that will be the backup. Look, Josh Heupel's done a great job at Tennessee, but I do feel like they they probably should have lost the Alabama game if you really dive into it. I was happy to see Tennessee win, and they won a lot of close games last year that I feel like it's probably not sustainable from year 1 to year 2. Also, They do host Georgia, but once again, I think Georgia will have no problem with the Tennessee Volunteers, and they got to go to Alabama. So revenge right there. So that's 2 losses right there. The non-con's not incredibly tough because Virginia's a terrible Power 5 team, but UTSA could bring some challenges there. Tennessee should get through them, but I just think it's too tough. Texas A&M is going to bounce back, bringing in Bobby Petrino. I think that offense will move. They've recruited really well. So I think that Texas A&M is a better roster and a better team now. It is in Rocky Top, so they could lose that one. A&M, that is. I just think though that there's too many hiccups there. At Missouri, always a tough road trip. At Kentucky, I feel like Tennessee's had Kentucky's number, but getting Devin Leary, they're a better team I think than they were a year ago, especially on the offensive line. There's just too many little spots there. Even the game at the Swamp. Remember, they've had a hard time at the Swamp historically in the 2000s. So I love the under on the Vols this year.
And we'll say they did a nice job of providing themselves some very nice, cushy non-conference games to be able to help you out going up against the likes of UConn and the old Governors of Austin Peay, which that's an intrastate rivalry. And I do like Austin Peay when it comes to college basketball. See some upside there. Football team, not so much, but I'm right there with you. The way that things broke within the conference, taking on both both Georgia and Alabama, and they do play against Florida as well. And it's going to be relatively rough on the road. As joining me on the show, we do have Colby Dant. He does tremendous work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and I know you're a little bit intrigued by this team, and it is South Carolina. Right now, we're finding their win total of 6. If you like the 6 under, you're able to get that at a plus 110, and I think it's a fascinating bunch because they were a little bit of a surprise last year. They're made up of a bunch of guys that have been sort of done that, been there. I do like the pedigree of their coach as well. And as we know, Spencer Rattler, this guy was one of the most highly touted recruits of last few years in college football. Completely flamed out at Oklahoma. He's been able to get a little bit of a second lease on his career here at South Carolina. But how do you gauge this team? Because every time I watch Rattler, I'm not really impressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's an experienced quarterback, and he was recruited that high for a reason. But at the same time, like, yeah, consistency's been a problem with him. And you know, as much as last season was pretty phenomenal, I feel like if you're a South Carolina fan, because they didn't beat anyone good until the final 2 weeks of the season. So if anything, they were a little challenged. Final 2 weeks of the season, they blow out Tennessee. And then they somehow pull the upset against Clemson on the road at Clemson. But and momentum was going good. Everything seemed like everything was going the right direction. Beamer magic was working. Well, whatever happened in the offseason, they got destroyed in the portal. Absolutely destroyed. Marshawn Lloyd, their starting running back, heads out to USC. Jaheim Bell, their star tight end, goes to Florida State. Actually, they lose the backup tight end, Stogner, to Oklahoma, who had previously been pretty good. Their best two defensive ends jump out in the portal, and they lost some guys in the secondary to the NFL. So you look at all that. Marcus Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, bolts to Nebraska. Now, that's kind of a touchy topic in Columbia. I feel like half the people wanted him out. Half the people, after those 2 wins, were like, "Hey, maybe we should retain him." But there's too many problems here. The offensive line was not great. They weren't good at running the ball. I believe they were 105th in the nation a year ago at running the ball. And the defense, I expect regression. They lose some of their best guys gone in the portal or graduation to the NFL. They were the 88th ranked defense a season ago. So I expect regression there. You look at the schedule, Tennessee's going to get revenge because they just ran it up on Tennessee. So having to go to Tennessee right there, challenging. Then you add in the rest of the schedule. Even the game against Furman, who I think is a top 10 FCS school, is tricky because they get a rivalry game to start the season against North Carolina. I consider that game kind of a 50-50 game. But then right after Furman, you have the Georgia Bulldogs in Athens. That's not winnable. And then you got to even like the Mississippi State draw, but at the same time, where the game is sandwiched right between Georgia and Tennessee. They got to go to A&M. They got to go to Missouri, where they never win. And Clemson's going to want revenge too. I think it's just a tough schedule. I think the under is the play with the Gamecocks this year.
Yep, when it comes to South Carolina, I do have some question marks around this team as well. It felt like they overachieved a little bit last year, and I do think that some of that positive momentum that they were able to get, some of that positivity in general, I felt like they were on the right side of a lot of those breaks. I think that they could be going a little bit awry there, and this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest question marks in the SEC. It's for, obviously, sad reasons. Mississippi State, as we know, Mike Leach was the coach over there, and man, that is a tough situation for them. You just feel for everyone around the Mike Leach family, around Mississippi State for what they're having to go through, but their win total is a 6.5. The over, you're able to get a plus 145 on that, but I do think that it's going to be a rough year, as sad as it is to say, for Mississippi State, because they're having to try to overcome a lot in this situation.
Yeah, Coach Leach was a good friend of ours too. So definitely, I'm hoping that we're wrong on this analysis. I really am. But you got to play the under. I think there's too much uncertainty. They bring in Kevin Barbay, the offensive coordinator from Appalachian State. So they're kind of ditching the air raid. I know he has some wrinkles of the air raid, but Will Rogers has been in the air raid since even high school. And I think you might see him under center some, which is an interesting thing there. I do like Zach Arnett. I think the defense will be solid. They're going to run that Rocky Long 3-3-5, but you dive into that schedule, and the Arizona game becomes a little more iffy. Even though I lean Mississippi State, I would prefer them not get LSU so early into the season. Like the fact they're getting Western Michigan and Southern Miss late, I would prefer them with a brand new coach who's never been a head coach in September. So, don't like the schedule the way that it's front loaded with the SEC teams. They got to go to South Carolina, which I think I kind of like the spot on where they get them, but there's just too much change, and I just feel like you got to say they're on the under. I look at them as a 6-6 team. I think that number is pretty spot on. Hopefully I'm wrong. I want 7-5. Much love to Coach Leach and his family.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. He was a great man, and hopefully Mississippi State can rise up. But Colby Dant always does tremendous work. He does an amazing job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.